Several hours earlier, Ghislain and his mercenaries rode hard toward the Dygald estate, the journey proving uneventful and dull. Not a single obstacle stood in their way, and the lack of resistance quickly sapped the excitement from their advance. Feeling bored, Kair voiced his disdain over Count Dygald's hasty retreat. He found it disgraceful that a noble would flee so quickly, abandoning his men without resistance. His voice carried contempt as he questioned how someone so cowardly could hold a lord's title at all. Gordon offered an apology for failing to intercept the Count during the pursuit. However, Kair waved off the blame with a grin, redirecting it toward Gillian. According to Kair, the rest of the mercenaries had done their part, and Gillian's failure served to stroke his ego. In that moment of banter, even the aches in his body seemed to fade. Watching Kair revel in Gillian's slip, Ghislain considered silently whether it might be time to include Gillian in the next bet. Kair soon turned his attention to Ghislain, raising a point of concern. If their approach to the Dygald estate was truly for negotiating surrender terms, that meant Count Dygald would be spared. Kair found the idea troubling, unable to believe they would simply let that particular lord continue living. Ghislain reflected on the situation. Everyone involved already knew the sort of man Count Dygald was, a scoundrel who had attempted to seize Perdium. On the surface, the Count's campaign appeared to be driven by vengeance over his son's fate. Because of that, pushing too hard in negotiations might backfire. Kair scowled as Ghislain explained that, in all likelihood, Tamos would settle for haggling over reparations and leave the rest untouched. The way nobles resolved wars felt entirely detached from the grim, blood-stained reality that mercenaries faced. In his mind, they should have just stormed the castle and ended it all. Nearby, Belinda asked whether he truly believed matters between nobles could be resolved so simply. Kair responded that, in the end, whether noble or mercenary, they were all just people. He questioned whether nobles thought themselves gods, entitled to act however they pleased, especially since they had initiated the war. From ahead, Ghislain urged Kair not to dwell on it. He noted that this course of action aligned with what his father would have done. With that statement, he brought the discussion to a close. Yet Belinda's eyes lingered on Ghislain with unease. His father might have left Count Dygald alive in the name of diplomacy or noble conduct. But the question that troubled her was not what the Lord would have done. It was what the son might choose instead. A smile touched Ghislain's lips as if in answer to that silent worry. He saw himself as different from his father. Nothing, not even a warning from Zwalter himself, would deter him from enacting his will. That was precisely why he had requested the authority of the Lord's proxy, to come to Dygald estate personally, under his father's name, but with his own purpose. Upon arriving at the gates, he resolved that Dygald would be claimed as his own. The task was clear: execute its disgraced lord without causing complications for Perdium. Such was the intent when he entered the estate. Tamos, the count in question, had not expected Ghislain. He anticipated the presence of Zwalter and was visibly unsettled to find the son in his place. Ghislain did not arrive with the pomp of a victorious noble. There was no arrogance in his bearing, only a firm, unshakable determination. Contrary to his father's likely approach, Ghislain wasted no time. After exchanging only a few formal words, he issued a clear command. His mercenaries were to bring Count Dygald to his knees. Kair and another mercenary obeyed immediately. They seized Tamos and dragged him from his ornate chair. Despite the setting being Dygald's own hall, not a single soul dared to object. None of the retainers, guards, or servants moved to protect their lord. Whether from fear or disillusionment, none wished to defy Ghislain. Tamos screamed in outrage, demanding to know what they thought they were doing. He hurled insults, calling the mercenaries filthy commoners who had no right to touch a noble like him. His words were laced with desperation, but they held no power. The mercenaries ignored him. They forced the count to kneel before Ghislain, his cries falling flat against the silent atmosphere. As Perdium's young heir, Ghislain had no obligation to lower himself to such displays. Yet he chose this course intentionally for his own amusement. Not everyone in the hall shared the silent approval of Ghislain's bold actions. Belinda whispered, asking whether he was truly certain about this. With a half-nervous chuckle, She added that if Lord Zwalter ever decided to reprimand her over this, she would be sure to swear it hadn't been her idea. But Ghislain remained resolute. Still on his knees, Thamos clung to a sliver of hope. He cried out that he had sworn loyalty to the kingdom, proclaiming that, as a subject, only the king held the authority to judge or punish him. He pleaded for restraint, demanded respect, and warned Ghislain that this overreach would not go unnoticed. His desperation, however, met only the cold gleam of Ghislain's sword, now pointed mere inches from his face. The young lord did not waver. With unflinching composure, he pronounced his judgment. Thamos Dygald was a traitor, he declared, a man who had broken the alliance and sought to seize Perdium, seduced by the promises whispered by the enemies. He framed the Count's actions as a quiet defection, not a war of vengeance, but one of opportunism. In that moment, Ghislain's killing intent surged. The pressure it radiated was crushing, far too heavy for someone like Thamos to withstand. That overwhelming presence delivered the message clearly. Those who turned against Perdium had only one fate awaiting them: death. Stunned, Thamos stared at the outstretched blade, struggling to process what was happening. With disbelief in his voice, he asked if Ghislain truly intended to kill him. Ghislain did not hesitate. After dragging countless others into this conflict, he stated it was only right that Thamos put his own life on the line or pay the price that befitted his actions. Tears welled in the corner of the Count's eyes. The realization struck like a blow. This was the scoundrel of the North, the unpredictable firebrand whose reputation as a madman. Thamos understood now that Ghislain might indeed face punishment from the kingdom, but none of that would matter to a man already dead. Ghislain raised his sword high, the movement fluid and final. The killing intent behind the motion left no room for doubt. This was no bluff. As the blade descended, Thamos snapped. Panic took hold of his voice, and he shouted for the young lord to wait. The blade halted mid-swing, still trembling in the air. Ghislain had anticipated this, and a reaction confirmed it. Thamos had walked straight into the trap laid before him. Breathing hard, face drenched with fear, Thamos asked whether compensation would be enough. This was no formal negotiation, but it was an agreement all the same, made under the shadow of a drawn blade. And so, Thamos offered what he still held, his land, a few baronies of Dygald, as reparations to Perdium. Belinda flinched at the declaration. Even Lowell, who had remained still and alert behind them, stiffened. The offer was unprecedented. A noble without land was no noble at all. Ghislain's expression shifted, though only slightly. A faint smile threatened to surface, but he suppressed it. Internally, he had known the Count would make such an offer, but he also understood the importance of closing the deal properly. Until the terms were sealed, there could be no celebration. He pointed out the issue without missing a beat. Inheritance laws forbade the casual transfer of territory. Only family or rightful heirs could inherit a domain. Accounts such as Thamos should understand that better than anyone. It cannot simply be traded like market goods. Thamos' voice now laced with urgency. He insisted he would handle the technicalities. In his desperation, he proposed recognizing Ghislain as a distant blood relative. His vassals, he claimed, could fabricate the necessary documents. All that Ghislain needed to do was accept them. Without waiting for consent, he barked at Lowell, ordering him to bring paper and pen immediately. Still, Ghislain hesitated aloud, suggesting that land alone might not be enough. The implication was clear. He expected more. Thamos caught the meaning instantly. In a hurried tone, he promised restitution funds on top of the land. Though the gold wasn't presently available, he swore he would extract it through taxes. He only needed a little time to squeeze the funds from his people through any means necessary. For Thamos, the only remaining thought was simple. A poor lord was still better than a dead one. Desperation seized him entirely. He offered and promised everything he could think of, now reduced to begging for Ghislain's mercy in hopes of being spared. Ghislain regarded the broken noble with quiet disdain. Inwardly, he questioned whether this man's life was truly worth clinging to so desperately. A lord reduced to this was hardly a lord at all. Then, to Thamos' astonishment, Ghislain declared that he would give him a chance. Elation surged through the Count, who in his mind already began forming a plan. He could take refuge with a loyal ally, send word to the capital, and perhaps, in time, reclaim his lost territory. But before those thoughts could fully form, Ghislain abruptly grabbed him by the front of his armor and hauled him up with brute force. Without a word, he dragged the disgraced noble from the estate's halls out into the open. Outside the manor, in the heart of the estate square, Ghislain flung Tamos to the ground, casting him before the eyes of the common folk. The people of Dygald stood in stunned silence. This act, throwing a noble before his own people, was not just dramatic. It was humiliation of the highest order. Murmurs broke out among the crowd. These citizens had watched their lord depart for war, heads held high under his banners. And now, he returned not as a hero or conqueror, but as a wretch, dragged like a defeated criminal by a single young man. Tamos turned to Ghislain with desperation and disbelief. He pleaded for whatever was planned here to be stopped, insisting that this public display was unnecessary. But Ghislain coldly dismissed his objections, warning him to keep quiet and reminding him that he now stood before those who truly held his life in their hands, the people he once ruled. Confusion flickered in Tamos's eyes, but the answer came swiftly. Ghislain stepped forward and addressed the gathering. His voice was sharp, clear, and carried with it the tone of command. He introduced himself to the citizens as Ghislain Perdium, heir to the domain of Perdium. He declared that Count Dygald had launched an unprovoked war for the sake of vengeance, and had lost. As a result of that defeat, Ghislain announced war reparations would now be collected from the people of Dygald. With that, he asked if anyone among them would step forward to volunteer for payment. Instantly, the tension in the air broke. Panic swept through the crowd. Protests rang out. One man shouted that their homes and livelihoods had already been bled dry during the war effort. Others cried out that they had nothing left, accusing the nobility of waging wars and expecting the common folk to pay the price. From the front, Ghislain raised his voice once more. As the Lord's proxy of Perdium, he claimed he would offer mercy. With it, he gave out two choices for them. The terms were brutal in their simplicity. The people could pay a heavy price to preserve Count Dygald's life, or they could kill him and be accepted into the protection of Perdium, free of further burden for the war. A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Commoners, trained from birth to fear the authority of nobility, had never imagined such a scenario. To lift a hand against a lord was unthinkable. To even raise a voice could result in imprisonment or worse. And now, they were offered not only the chance but to choose between continued servitude or release. Tamos's face red with rage and disbelief. He turned toward Ghislain and demanded that the humiliation end at once. But the words had barely left his mouth when a stone cut through the silence. It struck his temple with a thud, drawing a line of blood as he reeled from the impact. More followed. Another rock smashed against his head. Rage had taken root, and what began with hesitation quickly turned into a storm. One hurled an insult, his voice shaking with fury. Another screamed, recounting how Tamos's tax collectors had taken even the bread from his children's mouths. One woman's voice cracked as she shouted that her mother's keepsake had been confiscated for the war. They had been stripped bare, and now they were bearing their pain in return. Each person moved with purpose, driven not by fury alone, but by years of quiet anguish. They struck with their feet, their fists, and whatever crude implements they could find. Their target, the man once elevated above them by blood and title, now lay broken at their feet. Though Tamos's body writhed beneath the weight of their collective justice, no scream escaped his throat. He raised a feeble arm in a futile attempt to shield himself, yet the blows continued. The vengeance of the people knew no mercy. At a distance, Ghislain turned his back on the scene. He walked toward his assembled mercenaries without looking back, granting the people full authority to deliver their judgment. This, after all, was his chosen path, an execution by the hands of the people, unburdening Perdium from any technical liability. It was not a question of whether he could deliver the final blow himself. He had simply decided that he didn't need to. A calm, almost serene smile settled on Ghislain's face. As he reached his soldiers, he informed them that their work was complete. With finality in his voice, he declared that the war with Dygald had truly come to an end. Turning to Belinda, he made a quiet remark about his father's earlier warning. Belinda, half nervous and half resigned, could only smile awkwardly in response. She admitted that she was never truly worried. Ghislain would always choose his own way. Before long, the company returned to Perdium. The moment Ghislain delivered the details of the campaign's conclusion, the entire hall fell into stunned silence. A cold sweat trickled down the backs of Perdium's gathered vassals. Even Lord Zwalter himself showed unease. Ghislain spared no details. He reported exactly what had occurred, including how brazenly he had mocked the kingdom's laws and how he had driven Count Tamos to his end. There were no omissions, no gentle phrasing. He merely repeated the fact. Count Dygald was dead. Zwalter was visibly disturbed, and he reminded his son of the advice he had given earlier about affording respect to fellow nobles. But before the elder lord could continue, Ghislain interrupted. He assured his father that he had not forgotten that counsel. However, he explained, having seen things for himself, he made a judgment he believed was better. He justified the decision by pointing out that, had Tamos been offered a peaceful surrender, he would have simply bided his time and struck again. The reasons Ghislain spoke aloud were straightforward, but he withheld other motives, ones he had weighed more privately. Still, the explanation sufficed to defend the outcome. Albert struggled to accept what he had heard. With Dygald's forces obliterated, it seemed irrational to believe the territory could rise again. Homer voiced a similar sentiment. Neither man understood the deeper game at play, the forces that had silently backed Dygald in the war. Ghislain laid the facts bare. He reminded them that Dygald had attacked Perdium with a force of 7,000 soldiers, a number well beyond what the territory could muster alone. That discrepancy could no longer be ignored. He then revealed the greater truth. The Desmond County had supported Dygald, providing both troops and resources. Even more troubling was Rayfold's hidden involvement, its nobles working behind the scenes to intercept and silence every envoy Perdium had sent for reinforcements. Silence followed. These were two of the most powerful territories in the northern region. Until now, Desmond had always appeared neutral. Yet Ghislain alone had seen through the illusion. In reality, Desmond was but a loyal servant of the duchy, its neutrality a farce. Ghislain understood exactly who had acted within Rayfold. Acting independently of her house, Amelia had orchestrated the blockade. He knew her well enough to guess that she may have even executed the messengers. It was a tactic she favored, one designed to isolate her targets completely. Now, with Dygald under his control, the entire landscape had shifted. The territory shared borders with both Desmond and Rayfold. This geographical advantage meant that, should either of those powers move against Perdium again, any incursion Ghislain could be answered swiftly. The full weight of the situation had yet to settle in Zwalter's mind when another issue arose, the matter of rightful ownership. With the Lord of Dygald deceased, the territory could not simply be claimed by force. Lands such as these, by kingdom law, were passed to those within the bloodline or designated heirs. Zwalter voiced his concern plainly. Even with Tamos gone, the domain did not automatically fall to Perdium. Without a legitimate claim, the land remained untouchable. At that moment, Ghislain reached into his coat and produced a rolled parchment bound with an official seal. With deliberate motion, he placed it on the table before his father and urged him to take a look at it. Zwalter scanned its contents. His eyes widened slightly as he realized the nature of the document. It declared that Ghislain was a distant blood relative of Tamos Dygald and, more importantly, named him as first in line for inheritance of the Dygald estate. Calmly, Ghislain explained that the document had come directly from Tamos himself. With this, he declared, most of the potential disputes surrounding succession were now null. The document resolved them neatly. The chamber fell into silence yet again. The implications were staggering. Though the document was forged, the fact that it had come from Tamos's own hand gave it undeniable weight. Legitimacy, after all, was as much about perception as law, and the lands in question were what Ghislain had claimed as his reward for ending a war no one else dared resolve with such finality. Zwalter eventually broke the stillness with a word of caution. Ruling a territory, he reminded his son, was no easy feat. It required infrastructure, personnel, and constant management. Did Ghislain truly have enough people to oversee such a large tract of land? Ghislain met the question with a confident smile. Assuring his father, he replied that there was someone perfectly suited for the job. The scene shifted then, far from Perdium to a territory within the Siren kingdom. Austin, a city known less for nobility and more for chance. Within its borders lived a legendary figure Ghislain remembered well from a life before this one. A bustling tavern set the stage, its interior thick with the scent of smoke and sweat. The room was alive with noise, gamblers laughing, shouting, cursing, cheering. Austin was a haven for those who trusted in luck, and tonight, all eyes were fixed on a particular table. At its center sat a man named Claude. Claude faced a figure who led one of the local thug crews, a bald, muscular man flanked by grim-looking subordinates. The tension hung heavy in the air, yet Claude remained entirely unbothered. There was no fear in his posture, no hesitation in his gaze. A true gambler at heart, he sat as if he owned the place. With practiced ease, Claude swept 4 dice into a cup in one smooth motion, his fingers precise. Then, with flair, he spun the cup high into the air, the dice trapped inside. When the cup came down, he slammed it against the table, upside down, keeping the contents sealed. The bald man warned him darkly, reminding him of the consequences of cheating. But Claude, still grinning, gave no sign of intimidation. To him, this was sport, entertainment, an elaborate dance he had danced 1,000 times before. He mused that his opponent should smile too. After all, they were here for amusement. With a flick of his wrist, Claude lifted the cup to reveal the dice, stacked perfectly atop one another in a vertical column. Within Austin, he was known as the dumb genius of the gambling Denver. The sworn brother of the mercenary king, Claude the legendary strategist, Ghislain's #1 slave.